A most warm welcome to you all. I'm glad to see so many participants at this event. Welcome. Let me first start with some housekeeping information before we go to the speakers. I was informed that the event is being recorded. So when you speak in the microphone, when you have a question later on, make sure that you are heard and seen. So speak properly in the microphone. Should you do not wish to be recorded, then you can ask us your questions afterwards directly or through the mail. Having said that, I'm really glad that we have such eloquent speakers today. Thank you, Vice President McGuinness. Thank you, Jan Figel. Thank you, Marco Giacomini, Mauro Gatti, and especially Father El Rayani for being here today and share this event with us. Thank you for coming. We are having a new format of our report. Dennis will introduce that to you in a second. And while we are here, I would like to ask you, we are here amidst the nice European bureaucracy with everything around us, but do not forget at the same time that around this planet there are so many people suffering because of their religion or belief. And keep that in mind, as far as I'm concerned, through this event and also afterwards. The start of our event has the presentation of the report, but I also want you to bring this message forward after this event. Make sure that in your work and in your personal contacts you have, that you keep paying attendance to the freedom of religion or belief. And I'm sure when I look around, it will be no difficulty because I see so many friends who are active in this field. Having said that, I will now hand over to Dennis. He will introduce, I think, some elements of the report and the format of the report. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. And although this mandate may gradually, step by step, coming to an end, we can look back already at many, many years of cooperation, for which I'm very grateful, and also for a series of reports that were in the past, let's say, especially reports highlighting the developments in the world on freedom of religion or belief. And we did indeed try to go a step further together with also the EAS, together with the Special Envoy, Jan Figel, who is here. And I think in the past year we've made quite a bit of progress in working together at general level, but also at country desk level, which is extremely important. Just a few thoughts in the beginning. Why do we concentrate on freedom of thought, conscience, and religion or belief? We've said that in the past many times, but it should be recalled over and over again to explain us our attention. Well, the first issue, the first element is, of course, that religion or belief determines one's outlook on life. It's a source of inspiration by definition, as defined by the United Nations. It can take many different forms, from established monotheistic religions to spiritual concepts, like those of indigenous people, and also of new esoteric movements, but also to humanism and atheistic beliefs. So it's a very wide-ranging concept, but it has in common that it's so vital that it determines your outlook on life. Second point is that it's one of the human rights which was from the very beginning had both an individual and a community aspect. If the religion or belief concern determines your outlook on life, very often you're looking for allies. You want to worship together, you want to engage in, for example, humanitarian activities or educational activities together. That makes it also special and important for a society. And then finally, the manifestations can take many, many different forms: worshipping, teaching, practicing, and observing. And that means that there are strong ties, connections with other human rights. You find in the report also a section on intersectionality with other human rights, and we can say, and Jan Fiegel has often said this, you can say freedom of religion or belief is a bit the litmus test for the human rights situation in general in a country. If it's wrong with that freedom, you can rest assured that it's also wrong with freedom of association, it's freedom of expression. I also want to emphasize, and that's very clear in the report, that human rights angle is one angle of the whole situation that we are responsible for as intergroup. We have always advocated a broader look and the relationship between religion or belief on the one hand and society on the other hand. Beliefs are a powerful resource. They're easy to use for holding people together in a positive sense, creating communities, helping each other, helping others, realizing social rights, but they can also be abused by dark forces for creating hatred against others and sometimes as cover-up for other, for example, socio-economic contrasts. And that's why the second element of our mandate, religious tolerance, is equally important. That's also where merit, of course, comes in with the Article 17 dialogue, which is extremely important, and we come to that later. As the UN Special Rapporteur, Ahmed Shaid, observed in his latest report, the state should maintain a respectful distance towards religion or belief. And back in 2000, in my own thesis, I already advocated separation of state and religion. The state would be the neutral party, the arbiter between adherents of different religions or beliefs, when manifestations conflict with each other, or when they conflict with other human rights and fundamental freedoms. That means for politics, don't use religion or belief for your own political purposes. The state ought to guarantee the well-being of all citizens, irrespective of religion or belief. Reduce tensions, and you can only be an arbiter if you're being seen as embracing the adherents of all religions or beliefs. But also see religious and belief communities as potential actors in helping society forward, in bringing to the attention of the state those who have been forgotten, misunderstood, or even economically or politically persecuted. In protecting the most vulnerable, for example children, those deprived of a decent living. All main religions and humanism have these values in common. The state should recognize that and engage with these communities and their leaders, working together for a better world. That's why this year's annual report, that's what this year's annual report advocates. That's why we didn't stop at many violations. We've done that time and again, and the situation did not get better, even though our report is called Signs of Hope. The overall situation is getting worse. But we did include those signs of hope exactly because we don't want to stick to just the dark picture. We want to see, and we have seen, that in each country of concern, a focal country if you like, there are also initiatives on the ground, and we try to bring those out. It's not always perfect. Sometimes a sign of hope is not a sign of hope, as I detected in the report on Afghanistan, for example. It's just a bleak picture, and we should have said there that there is actually no real sign of hope there. At the same time, there are many countries where you can find initiatives that we can build on. And I'm very much looking forward to the continuing dialogue with the EAS, also with the country test, to see if our recommendations make sense. They should be practicable, they should be realistic, and we want to see, hopefully before the end of this mandate, if we manage to do another report, we also want to see whether these projects that we advocate have been started, materialized, or even have been a success, which we hope, of course. I think that Mauro Gatti, who is here on behalf also of the researchers, will tell us in a few minutes more about the methodology of the report. But the political part, which is of relevance to us, is that we have not stopped with the violations or the signs of hope. We've also made, the researchers have made an analysis of, does the third country matter to us, and do we matter to the third country? What's the leverage of the EU over the country concerned? What's the sensitiveness? But Mauro will tell more about that, but that means also that we try to make it more realistic what we propose and not stay in the blind. I think that without further ado, I would have given the floor, I think, tomorrow, but Merit, you have to leave us already soon, right?
Unfortunately.
So it's probably better if we give the floor to you as Vice President, who is responsible for the Article 17. And thank you so much for the good cooperation before we said.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to share this morning's meeting with you, dear colleagues, members of the European Parliament, reverends, ladies and gentlemen. As you see, I moved closer to Dennis because I was very moved by your words. I like the idea that there are signs of hope, but also in your presentation signs of realism as well. And you spelled out very clearly the huge significance of freedom of religion or belief for society. Where it goes well, the benefits; where it goes badly, the consequences. So, again, I'm very delighted to join you this morning for the launch of this report. I was appointed 18 months ago as the Vice President responsible for dialogue with the religious and non-confessional philosophical organisations, and in that time I've become even more aware of the importance and how we have to vigorously defend freedom of religion or belief around the world. Your intergroup has played a very crucial role in those efforts. Its members have successfully increased awareness of FoRB issues here in the House, in committees, in delegations and in our plenary debates. And wearing my Article 17 hat, I've always been ready to associate with this important work, which is done very calmly and very quietly, but always in a very systematic and effective way. So thank you, both Peter and Dennis, for that fortitude that you show. While Article 17 is very wide-ranging, allowing for dialogue with religious and philosophical organisations on any area of EU policy, naturally all of those churches and other groups are concerned to ensure that freedom of religion or belief is upheld and promoted. It's one of the basics. So last April, for example, at the suggestion of humanist organisations, I hosted a seminar here in the Parliament on the persecution and discrimination faced by non-believers around the world. And I was very pleased to work with Parliament's Human Rights Committee for the event because the members of that committee are key to bringing forward the concerns raised and bringing them to the attention of third country authorities. Similarly, on the 4th of December, I plan to host a dialogue on religion and human rights inside the European Union, and for this we will cooperate with Parliament's Civil Liberties Committee as well as the Union's Fundamental Rights Agency. The focus of this intergroup and this annual report is FoRB outside the European Union. Naturally, the issues we are dealing with are far more serious and on a far greater scale, ranging right up to full-scale genocide as perpetrated by the Burmese army against Rohingya Muslims, discrimination and intolerance faced by individuals or groups inside the European Union on the basis of their religion or belief, while unacceptable, are not comparable with the scale of those cases I've mentioned. They are more likely to be societal than institutional and can often be tackled through education. At the same time, it's important for the European Union to remain coherent when promoting FoRB or human rights in general. We need to have an impeccable record in our own backyard. This intergroup and the Parliament, through resolutions and debates, has often raised the problem, for example, of blasphemy and non-conversion laws, which in some countries can result in the death penalty. Some of the most problematic countries, such as Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, have disingenuously pointed to the existence of such laws in EU member states. While it is true that blasphemy laws inside the European Union have little practical effect due to our strong legal protections for fundamental freedoms, we could be more credible in our advocacy if we removed them. I note that Denmark has repealed its blasphemy laws since the last annual report was written. Ireland intends to hold a referendum on the matter later this year in order to remove the relevant provision in the Irish Constitution. I also welcome that more and more EU member states have begun to increase their own awareness and activity on FoRB. The latest two countries to appoint special envoys are Denmark and the United Kingdom, and I hope that many more will follow, including my own country. No doubt this extra focus will be welcomed by the EU Special Envoy, Jan Figel. It is important that member state efforts be coordinated with the European Union for maximum impact. Similarly, the Parliament is right to continue to call for the Special Envoy role to be better integrated into the External Action Service structures and work programmes. I know that on a practical level this is generally happening anyway, but it would be helpful to get the legal framework right. Perhaps the time to do that will be during the transition next year to the renewed Parliament, Commission and High Representative. Beyond the European Union, it is important to reinforce cooperation with like-minded governments and parliaments with a shared commitment to FoRB. While transatlantic relations have become somewhat strained in a number of areas, notably trade, US developments in relation to what they term international religious freedom can be welcomed. Ambassador Sam Brownback has been very active, and the first ever ministerial on FoRB he hosted in Washington over the summer is a positive development, and it is good to note that the EU was invited to participate at the institutional level as well as its member states. Perhaps the European Union could consider hosting a follow-up gathering. It would be a way to underline European leadership and commitment to FoRB. The 2018 Annual Report once again adopts very practical conclusions and suggestions as to how each of the EU institutions can improve its efforts to promote and defend freedom of religion or belief. I believe it is the first time that recommendations have even been made to the Vice President responsible for Article 17, and I welcome this, and am pleased to have the opportunity to discuss these ideas. Indeed, when I read the recommendations and conclusions, I wondered, had you been reading my mind? So we are on a good track. I fully endorse the suggestion that Article 17 dialogue needs to be more integrated into parliamentary work in the area of foreign affairs and human rights. It is for this reason that we have already organised 2 separate seminars in cooperation with the Foreign Affairs and Human Rights Committees, respectively. In addition, Parliament's bilateral delegations for relations with third countries can make a really important contribution by raising FoRB matters on the ground during visits. The chairs of all these delegations meet together once a month to discuss horizontal issues. The chair of that body, Madam Ines Ayanda-Sender, kindly invited me to address the delegation chairs with precisely that purpose, to increase awareness of FoRB in particular, as well as the need to reach out to faith leaders in general. In many parts of the world, religious leaders can be crucial partners for achieving EU foreign policy goals in other areas: peace and reconciliation, humanitarian aid, human rights, education, health and, of course, climate change. Arising from my exchange of views with the EP delegation chairs, we are already working on the second suggestion which the annual report makes, and that is training for members. The External Action Service was very helpful in this, making available its expertise. But resource considerations and the specific needs of members necessitate the elaboration of tailor-made religion and foreign policy training modules, including being country-specific. The responsible services in Parliament are currently working on this. So to conclude, in the short years that the FoRB Intergroup has been formally constituted, it has achieved a tremendous amount. And great credit is due to co-chairs Dennis and Peter, as well as all its members from across the political spectrum. And I think that's a great value, that it is across the political spectrum. The list of almost 20 EP resolutions in the past year alone, which include language on FoRB, is testimony to the efforts of these members to keep the issue high up on the Parliament's agenda. Likewise, a report being presented by colleague Gib in the Human Rights Committee this week, which reviews the European Union guidelines on FoRB, as well as the Special Envoy's mandate. This is another example of Parliament's leadership role in ensuring that the European Union foreign policy instruments are well deployed in the defence of freedom of religion or belief. Survey after survey by Eurobarometer tells us that European citizens want a union that is more than technocratic, one that is based on values and centred on people. The work of this intergroup has been doing this alongside other parliamentary bodies, the Commission, the External Action Services and Member States. So it is a good news story about a Europe that cares and protects, but also a union that is outward-looking, caring and protecting beyond our borders. The freedom of every person to express and live out their religious beliefs, or indeed to have none, is one that goes to the very heart of our identity and dignity as persons. We must do whatever is in our power to cherish, defend and promote this freedom. And I urge you to keep up the good work despite the obstacles. There are signs of hope. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Merit, and I think that it hasn't been so explicit in the past that we agree so much on the way forward. Thank you so much for all the concrete ideas. I think they have become a lot more concrete, of course, over time within our institution as well. And that's the idea that step by step, each year we have, and that's a sign of hope in itself, we have something to look back on that, that we move forward and not backward. Now, without further ado, I think that I already announced here Mauro Gatti, who has been coordinating the academic research underlying our reports, and that you find in a separate document in the annex, is now ready to tell us more about how you went about this giant task and take us a bit through your work. The floor is yours, Mauro.
Thank you very much. A giant task indeed. Actually, we tried to create a methodology for the analysis of the state of freedom of religion and belief in the world by focusing on some specific issues. More precisely, we tried to create a methodology that provides for information that is relevant for EU institutions and that is objective enough to support the formulation of practical recommendations for EU institutions. Objectivity was ensured through two means. First of all, through the use of multiple sources for the assessment of the situation in third countries. We used reports from governmental organizations, from third states' governments, for instance, the US Department of State. We used those reports from NGOs, confessionals and non-confessional. And we also used the laws of third countries directly and newspaper articles reporting on the situation on the ground in third countries. We tried, in every case, to use information provided from multiple sources, at least two, to ensure as much as possible the use of unbiased sources. When we did not find enough information, we said it openly, so you can find in some cases that there are countries where certain information are missing. And in those cases, we simply avoided taking a stance. We did not comment upon the situation in that specific country, on that specific issue. The second way we ensured objectivity is perhaps less obvious, and it is by using international law. Many reports on the state of freedom of religion in the world use, let's say, idiosyncratic standards. We decided to use a relatively objective one, international law. Therefore, we, first of all, defined the international law standards on freedom of religion. You can find them in the annex. These standards are defined on the basis of international conventions, notably the UN covenants, not only those. Soft law instruments adopted by UN bodies, for instance, the general comments of certain UN bodies. We used also international case law. And I would like to stress that you used only universal, international sources. We did not use European ones. And this for a very logical reason. We did not want the report to highlight a European perspective on international law. We wanted really to highlight what international law says, what third countries are bound by universal norms. To be sure that the rules we highlight actually bind third countries, we tried to err on the side of caution, which means that we adopted a relatively conservative interpretation of international law. We did not adopt a very ambitious one, meaning that when we highlight that the situation in a third country is problematic, probably that country is actually violating international law. Therefore, you can find in the report, in the annex more precisely, the assessment of the situation in 122 countries, assessment in the light of international law. In some cases, those countries are analysed more in depth. You find also a description of the situation in those countries. This is the case of the focal countries that were briefly mentioned. And we defined those focal countries that we analysed more in depth on the basis of what we hope are relatively objective criteria. Focal countries that are very important in our view for the European Union were defined on the basis of two different sets of criteria. On the one hand, some countries are simply important because they are among the worst violators in many cases, or are just politically relevant for the European Union. We identified those countries on the basis of the last report from the Intergroup. Other countries, actually the majority of focal countries in the report, were identified on the basis of criteria that we devised, criteria that speak of the relevance of those countries for the European Union, for instance, in respect of their pertainance to the list of candidate countries or the neighbourhood countries of the European Union. Other criteria relate to the sensitiveness of those countries to the influence of the European Union, for instance, their dependency on trade with the EU or their dependency on aid of the European Union. On the basis of all these considerations, every country was given a score that you can find expressed with an icon, an eye, a score going from 0 to 4. Meaning the 4 eyes means that the country is extremely focal for the European Union. In this way, you can find in the report detailed information, explanation for the scores that we gave to each focal country, those countries that are particularly relevant for the EU, in our view. But we also tried to focalise not only on those countries that are important for the EU, but also on those priorities that are important for the European Union. So from a thematic perspective also. As was already mentioned, freedom of religion has many different manifestations, many different forms. We decided to focus on those aspects of freedom of religion that are particularly relevant for the European Union, and we did so by looking at the guidelines on freedom of religion adopted by the EU in 2013. Those guidelines, as you probably know, identify 8 priority areas for the European Union. We focused on 5 priority areas in each country. 5 priority areas because 3 areas of freedom of religion or belief identified by the European Union do not actually correspond, in our view, to precise international law standards. Although they are important, that's the case of tolerance, for instance, they could not be really measured in terms of international law according to our methodology, therefore they are excluded from the analysis. We therefore retained only 5 priority areas, for instance, the adoption of religion or belief or the expression of religion or belief, and each country was scored from 0 to 2 in each of these priority areas, meaning that each country has 5 scores, from 0 to 2, and a final score from 0 to 10, 10 being the worst. The scores from 0 to 2 are given on the basis, as I said, of international law. When the score is 0, it means that we did not find any generalised violation of international law in that specific area. When the score is 1 or 2, we did find generalised violations. The score 2 is given to those countries where the violations are particularly severe. The distinction between general violations, problematic issues, let's say, and severe violations is rather arbitrary, we admit it, but we just inserted it because we think that there are situations, for instance, of violence that are not necessarily identical in different countries. It is one thing to have sporadic violence, and it is another thing to have a genocide. And we try to capture that by giving different scores to different countries. That's the reason why in the annex you find a list of quantitative data on each country, and each country has 6 scores, 1 per priority country, a general final score for each country, and the different scores are categorised on the basis in 3 categories: minor concerns for the case of relatively low scores, problematic issues for intermediate situations, and severe violations in the case of the highest scores from 8 to 10. We hope that this facilitates the reading of our data and facilitated especially the formulation of practical recommendations. Thank you very much.
I want to thank you very much, Mr. Gatti, for the good cooperation, because we are really pleased with the cooperation with the universities. That gave, I think, a more thorough and unique analysis. And I hope for the people in the room, you not only have the report, but you also will have the annex. And the annex will be available in the documents that will be distributed. I urge you not only to read the report, but also to have a close look in the annex about the report methodology and the priority areas of FoRB and how the analysis was made. I think that is very important for us, that this was a new step in our work in the collaboration with the universities. Having said that, you may know that when we have the presentation of a new report, we always try also to find some person who himself or herself encountered the difficulties of freedom of religion or belief. Last year we had the Saudi lady who was in prison, Miriam Ibrahim, and this year I am, well, pleased is maybe not the right word, because we are glad that we have found someone who can tell us and to you his personal encounter. And therefore I very welcome Father Paulus El Rayani. He's from a Coptic monastery, but unfortunately he was arrested in 2016 by the Egyptian authorities because they tried to close down his monastery, and therefore he was arrested. Now he is living in Italy. He was granted religious asylum there, and I must really tell you that I'm very glad that he is now in our midst. I have understood, when I'm right, there is translation. So he will speak in Arabic, am I correct? And we can listen to the English translation, is that true? Okay, so I ask you to use your headphone, and now the floor is yours, Father. Thank you very much for coming, and we will listen to your words and to your encounters. You have the floor. Zo, deze man van Thank you.
A very good morning to all of you. In the name of God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, I would like to thank you for the kind invitation. I would like also to thank all the participants who are with us today. I would like to tell you about what I've been exposed to, what I suffered from the torture, segregation from the security apparatus in Egypt, and I would like also to count everything that happened to me. But before that, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Father Paulus Al-Makhari Al-Rayani. I am monk in the monastery of Bishop Makarian Alexander. I was born on the 22nd of November 68, and before my holy order, I was a secondary teacher in Egypt. During my holy order, I was in charge, the abbot told me to be in charge of the construction, renovation, refurbishing the infrastructure of the monastery, which is part of the antiquities, basically, and registered at the Egyptian antiquities body, and there are 300 monks in our monastery. And unfortunately, we were told from the security apparatus that we cannot change anything unsigned because it was classified and we registered by the government, and we couldn't refurbish our caves or our prayer areas or our facilities. And we went to the people in charge of the government to negotiate with them and find out what the situation was. But then, unfortunately, we were struck by these security forces who came, who started themselves building in the surrounding of that monastery in that what they called was protected areas and protectorate, natural protection area. And And we, at that time, we tried to speak with the officials and, in order to negotiate with them. But unfortunately, there was absolutely no possibility to listen to us, and they threatened us that unless we vacate the areas, we would be subject to kidnapping, and we would pay very high bills and fines. And again, there was a quiet period, after which another series of attacks were waiting for us. Armored vehicles came, and we were hit by sticks, and tires guns were used, and there was about 45 vehicles that came in order to oblige us to vacate again. I went to the general and told him again that we are monks and not criminals, not terrorists, and therefore why do they deal with us in such a way? Then the general said, you either vacate the monastery and surrender the land, otherwise you would all be arrested. And then I told him, where do we go? But he said, that's not my business. You can go anywhere. All I want you to do is to vacate. And then I said, okay. I spoke with other monks and said, we agree that we are not going to move, and we could even die. That was martyrdom for us, because it was our land, and we couldn't possibly leave and vacate the area. So we were hit, beaten, using tear gas, sticks, taser guns, and they even used live ammunition in countering our resistance. And despite of all that, we remained there before these bulldozers, and they obviously they couldn't run over us, and therefore we resisted. And that was for a time. And then we were left alone. Things quietened again, but again it was. Things started again, and then when they left, obviously we had to take the injured people to the hospital with the ambulances of our own monastery, and everybody was feeling down, and there was trauma among the monks because of what had witnessed. Obviously, everything I have told you now happened prior to the revolution. Now, post-revolution 2011, we were also surprised by another assault by the security forces that came to arrest us, and they surrounded the monastery. And again, we resisted, holding our shrouds and holding our crosses, and saying that we are not going to move, but we are going to resist your assault. We were victim to these beatings and taser guns and sticks, and so the situation didn't change whether before or after the revolution. And we were notified that the government is going to confiscate, seize the land in order to construct some buildings, and a road and a highway or a road was to be built by the government and that would literally go or cut our monastery and take our land. We tried to negotiate with the officials, and we said, you have alternative. You can build the road in other areas and not cut our monastery in two. And we were told a definite no, that this is the only road we're going to take. And I said to them, why are you dealing with us the way you are dealing with us? Would you deal the same with the Al-Azhar? And they said, why are you comparing Al-Azhar to the monastery? Well, I said, these are two religious institutions, and therefore we should be dealt with equally in the same fair way. And then he just left and didn't even listen to me. And then I went myself to an engineering office, and I told them I commissioned them in order to have a survey on alternative roads. They did send me maps, less costly, more efficient, and cost effective, and I showed those maps to all the competent offices from the government, and that raised advertising. Many people spoke about that. It was just breaking news in Egypt. Obviously, the government refused all the alternative plans, and they insisted that the road be built through our monastery, and they started indeed implementing that plan. And we were facing threats and from the security apparatus who told us unless you vacate this area, we are going to send special forces that would literally kidnap you, and we would also be...
Okay. For the translation. Okay. I am sorry.
Apologies, Father says. He's been indeed speaking too fast. And therefore, threats continued our way endlessly from the security forces, and we were beaten, intimidated, psychologically pressurized, and one day, after a series of threats, security forces came to our monastery, and there were generals leading them. That was after midnight, and literally this is forbidden by law, and they arrested us, and they started to destroy. They started about 450 meters of the wall, and they left and told us that we are coming back tomorrow with all the bulldozer in order to finalize our project. Indeed, the following day, I have been kidnapped myself from the monastery after midnight. 6 people came to and got into the monastery, and I have been arrested, and I have been. They came to my cell, took me, and that happened on the 17th of March 2016. I was jailed, I was handcuffed, and I was tortured in my cell, and I was handcuffed until the following day, when I was transferred to court. I was in isolation, in an isolated cell, and for about 3 months. I mean, there was no air, no oxygen, and obviously my psychological and health situation went very bad, from bad to even worse. And the court asked one doctor, the court asked doctor to check me up, and he found out how bad my situation was. And during my imprisonment period, I was, there was a journalist that was commissioned by the government who came to me and asked me whether I was going to go back on my decision, and that would allow the road to be built through the monastery. I refused because that was against my belief and against my belief, and that was literally not true and not fair. So there was this bargaining, and this offence was regarded as a crime, and therefore another judge had been assigned to judge me, and I didn't have the right to defence, and therefore the hearings were literally unfair on my side, and the judge asked the defence to speak for about 2 minutes, and not elaborate in your defence. So they were not even able to give all the evidence, and obviously it was delayed because witnesses have been called to come who didn't show up. There was this procrastination, and I was literally sentenced to 2 years of jail, and I was taken to a high surveillance jail where I was serving my 2-year sentence. And by law, I was supposed after 6 months to be released, but however, that my request of release was rejected, and my sentence was renewed by 6 other months because I was a danger of the national security, and that was what they said to me, and therefore I had to spend my whole term behind bars. I don't understand why I was a threat to the national security, and while I was in jail, the security forces started building the road that literally cut the ministry, and even up until today, that specific road has not been finished, has not been completed, and because there were alternative roads, and what we told them was not feasible. We told them that they shouldn't do what they wanted to do. So I think down below that their aim was not the road, but their aim was to literally destroy and knock down my monastery, our ministry, and that was the ultimate goal that was not said to us. Personally, my only alternative was to go to Rome and ask for an asylum, and I left, luckily managed to leave Egypt, and I went to Italy and asked for asylum in this country. There were many charges against me in Egypt, and I arrived in Italy with the legal documents that were given to me by the Italian consulate, and I arrived on the 5th of April 2018 and asked for asylum in order to protect myself for the torture, and because I was literally tracked by the Egyptian security apparatus, and I really hope that the Italian authorities would give me a permanent residence and to live in one of the monasteries in order to continue my life. And if that cannot happen, I am calling upon you all to give me a hand. Now, with regard to the situation of the Copts and the Christians at large in Egypt, I can tell you the threats are as follows. Christian girls have been kidnapped, and we take, kind of sexual pictures of them in order to threaten them and oblige them to convert to Islam, harass them, harass the monasteries because they are not lawful, deprive Copts and Christians to have promotion in terms of jobs and promotion, and also harassment that the students, Christian students, are facing, and there was a law that any Christian male student would not study medicine because Muslim women in Egypt cannot be checked by a non-Muslim doctor. That was one of the reasons. And also the media as well are attacking us because there's some kind of an attack on our belief, on our freedom of religions. On the other hand, there are books and textbooks that have been distributed that incite to hatred against us. In addition to the law, the blasphemy or defamation law that was enacted, but that was not implemented when the situation was, in favor of the Christians, when we were victims of defamation, of blasphemy. And even some imams are also instigating, not all the imams, but I do insist that there are some imams who instigate against us. Now, in addition to fake accusations, malicious accusations against us. And there has been also at one account for children in the primary school. Some students in primary school have been taken to court because they spoke about Daesh or Muslims, and the teacher who was there overheard them, some kind of one of them extolling what Islam is, and then obviously he spoke to the security forces, and they were sentenced. Another lady as well was also sentenced to 5 years, also because she spoke out. Now, this is regular occurrences in our country, unfortunately, against our population. And also when a Muslim attacks Christians or Copts, obviously the killer, the attacker is arrested, taken to court, but then he is obviously in a twinkle of an eye released because we said that he is mentally not fit, and these are daily occurrences that we are victims in our country. So this happens on a regular sentence, and we see that we are victims of attacks, and then people who attack us are tried in a very soft way, and the sentence sentences are extremely soft, and they are released. Copts and Christians are being attacked, their properties are being attacked, and we try to displace them. And lately, 160 families have been displaced to other areas, and their properties have been forfeited by courts and confiscated, and the Ministry of the Ministry of Social Affairs promised to reintegrate them in their homes, but that never happened. Now, for the last lately, one of the extremists has asked ransom. He bullied one of the Copt businessmen to give him a big amount of money, and this attacker told him that unless you give me that money, I will burn your business and burn your family. So that Copt businessman went to court, went to the police station in order to tell them that he is being threatened by this person. So he went to the police to the police station. His wife was waiting for him outside. She waited hours and hours, and then she found out later that her husband, who went to complain to the police, was beaten to death inside the police station, and the autopsy was not allowed, and she doesn't even know what happened to him. And obviously when the body was given to her, she could see there were bruises and he has been strangled, etc. So the wife now, she's being threatened in order to silence her, in order not to speak out about this situation. So many also properties of Christian Copts have been attacked in Armenia areas. So their houses are being burnt, stormed, and their properties forfeited. So in a nutshell, there are many attacks, many accounts that I can tell you. And obviously the paper here cannot be exhaustive enough in order to tell you everything that we are go through. So Copts Christians are living in intimidation, and also I believe that even the President Sisi, who tries to protect us, even he himself is being pressurized by some stakeholders in the apparatus somehow in order to put pressure on him. So if you, the European Parliament, can exert some kind of influence in order to help our situation in Egypt, so we would be extremely thankful. And thank you very much for your kind attention.
So, when I'm well informed, we have in the room someone who's a danger to national security. A very warm welcome. And I do hope, Father, since you are now several months in Italy, that the Italian government will help you with a permit to stay in that country. Before I introduce Jan Figel and say a few words about his work, it's always difficult. You should not, especially in a room, welcome someone, but for this occasion I will do. I would like to welcome very much the Special Ambassador from Denmark, Mr. Michael Seur, that you are here now this morning. It's a pleasure for us to see you here. Welcome. Yeah, and then Jan Figel. Jan, you know, it's always very good for us to collaborate together with you, and we are very interested in your work, and we highly appreciate that. In a way, it's an uphill battle, not only in the field you are working, in the actual situation you are participating, but also uphill battle within the European institutions. And I think step by step we are gaining ground up on this hill, but more needs to be done. But I want to thank you, before you give your speech, on behalf of Dennis too, for the good collaboration and the good spirit you show all the times. You have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you all for being here together as those who are converted to FoRB or promoters of freedom of religion or belief for all, for everyone, everywhere. Yes, it is uphill struggle. We are not alone. I want to assure you that history was made, formed by minorities, but creative minorities. Majority will join, majority will adhere, will come when time is ripe or something happens, but we need this sort of groups and communities which are not giving up, which are speaking on behalf of voiceless or defenseless, and brings some hopes, or at least signs of hopes. And as you are the first ever institutionalized intergroup in the history of European Parliament and European parliamentarism, I am first ever special envoy. But this is not end of story. It's rather new level, and I hope it will bring some fruits and further changes, and especially for the sake of those who are suffering, who are persecuted, not so much only for our meetings or reports, but really for a more humane world in 21st century. Today's agenda is a reflection on your annual report, and I think that particularly this is already something innovative, very fruitful, because we have a report which was not in the past made by European Parliament or the group within the Parliament. Now this is the fourth issue. So we have a series of reflections, and that's very good, not only for the Parliament, but for all around and for the world around. I like to say that for freedom of religion or belief, freedom of conscience, freedom of thought is a civilizational issue. Where this is respected, protected, promoted, we see different civilization. And where this is oppressed, again, something totalitarian is growing. So this intergroup is a promising space, and it reflects ambition to join forces to share a common space or common ground to seek common good. Bonum commune. I like to speak about it because European Union is fruit of a quest for common good in Europe, of divisions, hatred or wars or Holocaust. I will focus on three concrete points on a report and my first takeaways from this report, then on the mandate of Special Envoy, which is not so much about me, but I am in the middle of these debates and reflections, and there is a very strong message about Special Envoy's mandate for future. And then, if you like, I can share some ideas about my next engagements, missions, my work in coming time. So on the report, of course there are many reports. It was mentioned made by states or state institutions or non-governmental institutions. Some of them are also in this hall. I thank you for your work. And this is one unique report because it is built with an EU focus, European Union focus, and is an EU working tool. So it should serve to our diplomacy and foreign policy decision makers, and this is already a great asset. I was also appealed by the focalness for the European Union methodology. I quote, whose object is to screen sensitivity of European Union influence in each country to relevance of this country for the European Union. It is an interesting idea. We cannot engage everywhere. We need to focus. We need to prioritize, but also to be smart, or if you want, to be more effective. I admit I have not yet seen details of methodology to calculate the score. In the first instance, the application of the methodology offers thought-provoking results. And I have to admit I am interested, but also sometimes a bit puzzled, because I can give you one example. I was twice refused and then twice visited on the invitation Pakistan, very important, big country, nuclear power country. My experience is that there is a, for example, GSP Plus instrument, very special. It's between European Union and several countries. The GSP Plus trade special agreement and conditions make a difference. It makes a lot of potential influence on our relations and the policies. All human rights activists who I met during my visits there agreed that GSP Plus is the only human rights mechanism which can deliver real progress in this area. My first visit generated a second one, showing unexpected also openness by religious leaders and state figures to speak and to work on pluralism for equal citizenship, very important objective for not only Pakistan. And I hope that the process will continue, so the European Union can play a role in Pakistan in a respectful but also strategic way. I would like, for example, to read some reflection and methodological score on Russia, which is missing in the report, and changes in Russia last year were very negative for religious freedom. This is to say that focalness should be seen as an element to consider, a call for realism, but should not stop us from action in countries that are known to be severe for violators. So somewhere we don't have such impact, but we have to work with, we have to engage, because it's a nightmare for people. For example, so-called Democratic People's Republic of Korea. And I praise concrete and country-tailored recommendations. Let me quote the stated objective of this fourth report, which is to, I quote, deliver a set of tangible, feasible, practical proposals that encourage policymakers and incentivize our bilateral partners to engage for FoRB promotion. And the report really delivers on this. That's really a great sign. I'm impressed by the wealth of proposals. They are inspiring. I know there is huge work that was done behind this, with personal engagements of co-chairs, but also academics and scientists and NGOs. Many meetings and exchanges took place with European External Action Service, and this intense process is already FoRB promotion in action. It is already action. Colleagues have been already sensitized, and they are part of the process. To illustrate this, the report guides us beyond a general call on boosting literacy on FoRB and offer the European Union a wealth of concrete options to walk the talk, not only to say, to express, but really to implement. Many are quite innovative, quite unusual and convincing, targeting specific groups of stakeholders, for example, police, state police, or security forces. There are other recommendations at the policy level which are very interesting. Let me quote a few countries where I was on mission so I can really a bit compare. I think of Sudan. I like the idea of human rights or FoRB internal dialogue task force, as suggested, I think, by head of delegation Jean-Michel Dimon. On Pakistan, I mentioned, I know that the report recommends to include FoRB as a priority in the next EU-Pakistan strategic partnership or engagement plan, which is a new tool, new bilateral high-level agreement, and work out a roadmap towards better management, if not yet removal, of the blasphemy laws. Very negative experience of the populations or minorities there. On Bosnia-Herzegovina, I also like the idea to foster partnership between business and FoRB, and to promote FoRB in the workplace. You know, private sector has huge potential to boost for and respect for diversity, and our support can be catalytical there. And of course I welcome the systematic attention given to the signs of hope, which is the title of our meeting today. Good news and positive trends are vital. We must be lucid and as rigorous as possible on denouncing violations. There is also a tremendous urgency to collect and make visible and build on signs of hope. Bad news tends to occupy all our screens and also monopolize our attention. Let us speak up and be vocal on good cases. Verba vocant, exempli trahunt. Words are calling, but examples are pooling. There are millions of silent promoters and practitioners of FoRB, living FoRB in their everyday life. That's why in my work I also connect and liaise with countries where there is a capital of inter-religious conviviality. This is a term used in Lebanon, and I plan to go there this month. Or inter-religious harmony, which is a term used in Senegal. I was there last year. There are many signs of hopes on all continents. It is important that we make them more visible and possibly go viral, to be repetitive, to become inspirational. And my takeaways and engagement to follow up the report. I can assure you that this document will be duly on my table and in my luggage when I travel with the guidelines. I will promote it and share it with the colleagues in European diplomacy, heads of delegations, and in the Commission, and of course this is your role here in the Parliament and in the public. The beauty of such innovative methodology is to be transparent, of course contestable, of course improvable, but most importantly to trigger a serious reflection and structured debate. So it's not end of work, but rather introduction or offer for more. In my work I will also challenge it, try to explore spaces to make EU impact where focalness is low. And my proposal is to be a critical friend. A friend is somebody who tells you the truth. And we need such friends. Tomorrow the report will be discussed in COHOM, in the Council Formation on Human Rights. This is a great opportunity to engage with the Member States in making your workable recommendations happen and play out the EU card in times where the European Union's joint efforts are indeed so important. And I also applaud to countries like Denmark or United Kingdom or Germany who joined our effort to make the FoRB even more visible, credible and efficient part of our policies. It's important. It cannot be just kind of or hobby. It is central for 21st century, more humane world. On my mandate, which again is a bit sensitive to reflect from my side, but I think it's also my responsibility for future, it is important to institutionalize the role of Special Envoy. It cannot be just prolongation of annual mandate. It must be something deeper, better structured, more anchored for the sake of interinstitutional cooperation, but especially, again, for the sake of those who suffer, and we can and we should help. So thank you for positive recognition of my work. It is a joint effort, and also for your ambitious recommendation on a renewed and reinforced mandate. I really appreciate this, not because of myself, but the role which can be played by this policy. I think this is important for the European Union, for many colleagues, European delegations, headquarters, and also for civil society and religious-based organizations. I think when we combine hard-working, team-working, and networking, we can be fruitful, more fruitful or successful in our ambitions. I agree on the line in the report. There is no hierarchy of human rights. FoRB needs to remain fully embedded in the human rights agenda. But as I say, and it's even quoted, it is a litmus test, because FoRB is expansive right, and where this is neglected, all other civil and political rights suffer. and vice versa. So when we work for FoRB, we work for human rights. And that's very much needed now in time of divisions and misunderstandings. When you say FoRB, you say religions, beliefs, conscience, and this touches the most intimate, delicate, deepest sphere of humanity and human dignity for everyone, everywhere. FoRB is about culture and identity. Those who do not understand identity cannot understand what's going on in the world today, and it is frequently related to religious dimension. So it doesn't mean to misuse or to abandon, but to understand and to step up from politics of identities to the ethics of responsibilities. We need engagement. We need to engage also with religious actors who are, on one side, duty holders, on the other, duty bearers, because freedom is always connected with responsibility. In the last couple of years, I have seen more and more initiatives addressing FoRB with a dedicated or fine-tuned approach. Some speak of religious or interreligious engagement as a key ingredient for more FoRB. Other initiatives aim at bringing human rights and religions closer. For example, the European Union Agency on Fundamental Rights in Vienna calls on a shared space and works intensively and bravely, I would say, on this line. It started recently. It will continue in September this year again. Faith for Rights, maybe you know it, Beirut Declaration. It's another promising platform. For SDGs 2030, we know and we say, without FBOs, faith-based organizations, we will not meet those objectives. We need to act accordingly today. I believe we can all contribute closer to make this space exist and thrive. We cannot promote FoRB without fair and responsible religious engagement. And I will repeat, we cannot promote FoRB without fair and responsible religious engagement. So therefore, I think that your reflection or proposal even to enlarge the mandate, to combine protection and promotion of freedom with interreligious dialogue and responsibility is the right approach, because freedom without responsibility will cease to exist. FoRB cuts across many other areas. When I go on mission, these interconnections or intersections naturally come up. You need FoRB to be upheld to have religious actors engaged in peace building, in conflict prevention or conflict resolution, in fight against violent extremism or prevention of violent extremism, and work on de-radicalization, anti-radicalization. One of the recommendations is about expanding the scope of the mandate to cover engagement with religious actors. And I think this is a good idea. Not because of me, not because of Jan Fiegel, but because it's really a good idea. FoRB is entry point in human terms. Is not always the most effective one to promote FoRB. Sometimes I experienced that when I was seen with my business card or mandate as very sensitive in the areas. In many countries, they see this agenda as Western post-colonial agenda. We need positive approach. And as many human rights actors agree, a new narrative. So to have more FoRB, we need engagement in other areas with other actors. Last June, in the European Development Days, so-called EDDs, as you know, organized by DG DevCo, an unprecedented debate took place. It was a debate on religion and gender equality. A lot of people, full auditorium. And why was I introducing this debate? Because religious engagement on gender equality is also an ingredient for FoRB, and for real, genuine FoRB promotes, genuine FoRB promotes gender equality. It's not something speculative or problematic. This is an example on how the agendas intersect. And last, to conclude, yes, I'm here to work. I didn't come to teach or preach, but rather to reflect, encourage us in going on uphill, but it makes sense. we can see already the fruits and signs of hope. During summertime, I was in several countries. The last one was in Thailand when there was a regional meeting of Southeast Asia human rights defenders and FoRB promoters from many countries, and with the focus on FoRB, Vietnam, Myanmar, Indonesia, Malaysia. I was in London and in Oxford for more academic events, engagements. Now I'm preparing for Lebanon, Malaysia and Indonesia in November, Burkina in October, Egypt, then Uzbekistan, which is an event in Central Asia organized by the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, and so on, not in isolation, not individually, but with all of you, with like-minded. And really I want to appreciate, since I have this occasion to speak here, maybe this is the last before or we shall see, in terms of annual reporting, but this was extraordinary community. And I said to my collaborators or colleagues in the field, like UN Rapporteur Ahmed Shahid or Heiner Bielefeld before, I am not a rapporteur. That's advantage, because reporting is something different. We are actors or policy makers. It is more flexible or more, I would say, adaptable tool for engagement with different partners, with high-level officials, religious leaders, but also with local communities. And we need that, not only reporting, not only knowing the situation, but really working credibly, intensively, because this is our not only opportunity, but especially this is our responsibility. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jan, for your kind words. And I must say that this is, of course, now in public and we're in a panel, but I can rest assure you that actually from week to week or month to month, we have had very useful and constructive informal meetings between the intergroup co-chairs and the special envoy. And I think it has always been inspiring, and also, if I may say so, you're a very humble and modest man in what you're doing, whereas at the same time you're doing a lot behind the scenes and in front of the scenes, and I think the intergroup in general is very appreciative of what you said today, but also of your work in general. Let me now turn, we are a bit running late, so maybe we can squeeze some of the, where we again take the floor, Peter, into a shorter time, but I'm very pleased to see here Mr. Giacomini, who is Managing Director of Human Rights and Global and Multilateral Issues in the External Task Force, the European External Action Service. And I'm very happy to see you here. And expectations have been increasing even during this panel, so I'm looking forward to what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to warmly welcome the launch of the report of the European Parliament Intergroup on FoRB, and thank you for the invitation to this panel. The past 3 reports of the Intergroup were already key in addressing recommendations to the ES on how to strengthen the implementation of the EU FoRB guidelines. As you know, we have guidelines as in on other human rights issues. The interim report presented in 2017 called us, inter alia, to increase our internal trainings to enhance public diplomacy and transparency in our FoRB policies. We believe to have acted accordingly. As regards the new approach you are proposing, the new methodology used for the report is a very welcome step, as it addresses concrete recommendations to the ES in 30 countries of concern. In the past months, we have worked very closely with the co-chairs of the Intergroup and their political advisers. They met more than 17 desk officers from the ES to discuss how we could improve our protection of FoRB around the globe. The process itself has been a great exercise for us, as it fostered reflections on FoRB and was an opportunity to continue to raise awareness between our diplomats. And let me add that for us in the Global Directorate, it's very useful because it closely associates the geographics to our reflection. This report is a very practical tool that we will share with all our delegations in the countries of concern, encouraging our missions to take action along your course. Your particular attention to our leverage is really a relevant approach. In order to trigger results, we constantly ask ourselves how to enhance our leverage. We firmly believe that the EU as a whole is a strong diplomatic player, being the major aid donor and a trusted peace broker that has a wide variety of tools to promote and defend human rights. We can, of course, think of our financial instruments such as EIDHR, ENI or ICSP, but also of our trade policies. GSP Plus was mentioned by Jan Fiegel, counter-terrorism policies or enlargement policies. It is true that human rights diplomacy is very challenging nowadays. It is increasingly difficult to find interlocutors in third countries' governments that are human rights friendly and that will have the political courage to uphold fundamental freedoms. Finding common agreements in the multilateral fora is also trickier than it used to be. On a daily basis, we receive recommendations from civil society, human rights NGOs, faith-based organizations, and religious actors on how to uphold FoRB. If most of them are very valid, in several occasions the reality of the field is a fierce obstacle to their applications. For example, in cases of governments not willing to engage through the traditional channels of policy dialogue. Your work is a key guidance that will allow us to potentially embrace innovative approaches and bypass barriers. We have noted, in particular, with strong interest, original suggestions such as to continue our support to the educational system reform to promote FoRB, because, as you rightly mentioned, really specific actions as the dissemination of inclusive textbooks based on non-discrimination of religious and non-religious minorities can trigger long-term and sustainable respect of FoRB. Your emphasis on the power of creative industries is also really relevant. We have noted your recommendations to promote inclusive human rights narrative through film and media, for instance, in countries such as Saudi Arabia. Your report is also an excellent reminder that besides very focused actions, we can address root causes of human rights violations, such as impunity, through supporting justice system reforms. For example, it's mentioned in your recommendations for Guinea. Or electoral reform, it's present on your chapter of the Maldives. Using new approaches to promote and protect FoRB doesn't mean that we will give up our traditional tools. We are still we will raise. We are still doing it, and we will raise our FoRB concerns in our numerous policy dialogues, such as our human rights dialogues, GSP Plus monitoring missions, EU accession negotiations. Your recommendations also go along with this line, as in several countries you are calling us to continue to be an active peace broker by liaising with religious sector and make full use of our traditional tools of public diplomacy, as well as raising our concerns on blasphemy laws and hate speech, for instance. As regards the idea of being an active peace broker, let me just indicate that I had the opportunity to witness the huge role religious actors, religious leaders played in the Central African Republic in order to, let's say, reduce the tensions and try to, let's say, having at least greatest peace possible considering the context. The Archbishop of Bangui, the Imam was the leader of the Muslim community, and an evangelic pastor were really instrumental in calming the situation at the height of the crisis, and are still very committed to maintain as peaceful a situation as possible in going to difficult places in the country. So I think that's a great example of how a religious leader could act for the common good. We also appreciate your efforts of identifying signs of hope in every country of concern, whether they find their source in authorities and or religious actors, as for instance, as I said, CAR, but also the commitment of the Burundi's faith leaders to peace and reconciliation, or in the civil society, drafting of a pact for equality and individual freedoms in Tunisia, for example. These signs of hope not only motivate us to keep working for promoting FoRB, but also allow us to have a better entry points for our policy dialogues with third country authorities. In addition, as human rights promotion is often under attack for allegedly being a Western imposition, as was alluded to by Jan, it is key to foster regional exchanges of best practices and signs of hope. We firmly believe in the importance not only of the multilateral fora, such as the Human Rights Council of the UN, but also of regional platforms such as the OSCE. This is why we have now structured human rights dialogues with the African Union. It's very positive and useful, with ASEAN, or a policy dialogue with the OIC. Sorry. It is also important to note that we do not only act on FoRB on human rights in general in the 30 countries of concern highlighted in the report, but we have and will continue to have a comprehensive approach, raising FoRB in all our diplomatic bilateral relations. I will add some additional points on the recommendations to the ES. First, we have gladly noted your positive evaluation of several actions of the ES, including our work to defend individuals whose belief, religious or non-religious, are more vulnerable and ostracized, with less possibilities to advocate towards the international community. And as you correctly pointed out, we have dedicated resources to foster the training of our diplomats, both at HQ level and in the field, to allow them to promote and protect FoRB. Key issues have been disseminated, such as the international human rights law regime regarding FoRB, the impact of blasphemy laws, the several multilateral initiatives to address FoRB violations, such as the Rabat Plan of Action or Faith for Rights. And in addition, in our trainings we have made an emphasis that FoRB protects individuals, not faith, from all belief, including non-religious actors. We welcome the fact that in your general conclusions you do not only address the ES but also reach out to key other institutions, and I want to take this opportunity to praise the cooperation we had with Jan Figel and his office over the past years. We have increased significantly the communication between our EU delegations, Mr. Figel, and us ahead of his missions. This had allowed us not only to enhance FoRB promotion, but to link the defence of FoRB with all the other aspects of ES human rights diplomacy. The role of the USR, Stavros Lambrinidis, has been key in the matter. USR Lambrinidis has mainstreamed FoRB in all his work, allowing us to defend human rights as interdependent, universal, and indivisible. I think this notion of indivisibility is fundamental because, of course, all human rights should go together. And I can give as an example of the action of USR Lambrinidis the fact that he was representing the HRVP in the Washington conference at the end of July. As you know, you will address member states in COM. We encourage you to tailor specific recommendations to the 28, because member states can have a great diplomatic leverage in the field, in their national capacities, of course, and member states' internal FoRB legislation is also a key aspect for us. For an effective diplomatic action, the internal-external coherence is, of course, fundamental. So, in closing, I would say thanks again for the report. We will disseminate your recommendations to the EU delegations, and we are always open to further suggestions and to explain our action in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your nice words and also practical steps forward. Before we turn, and Peter will moderate that to you and to your questions and hopefully our answers to those. I want to bring us a bit back on the ground, because we've been very nice to each other in the panel and with all the players, and I think it reflects the way we have cooperated. So the niceness was sincere also on our side. At the same time, if we look at our report, and if you look at the country recommendations, if you look at the methodology, Jan Fiegel already referred to that, we fully recognize that improvements can still be made. For example, the researchers already know that we think, as Bureau of the Intergroup, it's better to start with the violations and then look at the leverage and sensitiveness, so the focalness of the country, so that we include every country where there are sincere violations and then apply the test, what can we expect from the EU and its leverage over that country. So for a next report, which I do hope we can indeed still present in June, when the new MEPs have arrived, but they're not installed yet, I mean they're not operational yet. We are still the outgoing MEPs or those who are happy enough to stay here in the Parliament have both roles, but then we can show what this intergroup has been also to the new colleagues who have to take over. And I think therefore the researchers are ready to do another job in a quick time in the rest of this year. I think we still need to discuss the details, of course, and the mandate, but I hope it's manageable to have another report. And that brings me to my recommendation from what I've heard. When it comes to the individual country recommendations, I would really like to have a continuing dialogue also with your geographic desk officers, country desk officers, because some of our recommendations may be very practical, can be implemented maybe instantly, some will require a lot more thought, and some may be less realistic than we had hoped for. But if we continue that dialogue, then in the next report we can also indicate what happened in between, and as far as this is public at least. Secondly, I also want to turn to the NGOs here in the room and also ask your help. If you look critically through the report, I mean, I think Jan Fiegel said that friends can be critical friends, and I know we're all friends in this room, but please be critical. If you find things that you think are completely wrong, or that you have from the field different experiences with, or that you're missing things, missing ideas, please tell the Secretariat of the Intergroup, and you can rest assured it will be part of our work for the next months to come. I leave it at this. I had a lot more by way of conclusion or provisional conclusion, but I think we need the time, as Peter already indicated quietly to me, for you and your questions.
Thank you very much, Dennis. I think we have now half an hour, 40 minutes to give the floor to you for questions to the panel. And when you have a question, please raise your hand, and when you are given the microphone, tell your name, your organization, and also for who you want to ask the question. And I ask for your collaboration. This is always a bit difficult, because sometimes people start to have a speech themselves. I ask you not to do that. We have had enough speeches now, so if possible, keep your question short and straight. I will start now with the gentleman at the back.
My name is Philipp Sauer. I'm a journalist with EPD News Agency from Germany. I have two questions. One, it's maybe simplistic. What is the situation of freedom of religion and belief in the world today? Has it deteriorated or improved since the last report? That's the first question. The second is a question for explanation. Does the report cover all countries? I read something about that it doesn't cover countries which are not deemed problematic. On the other hand, I saw countries like Norway and Liechtenstein. So which of the third countries does it not cover, if at all? Thanks.
I did not mention the question to whom, but maybe I can give the floor to Dennis.
Sorry, to you, to yourself and Mr. de Jong.
Yeah, and maybe also to Mr. Gatti, because you had some methodological question. But maybe Dennis, you first.
Well, very clearly on the first question, we admit that the situation is continuing to deteriorate. And so the urgency for including freedom of religion or belief literacy is only increasing. That's the tenet of our report. And when we call it signs of hope, it's to make the U-turn that we don't stick at only that conclusion, but we also think together with the EAS, together with the Special Envoy, the Commission and other colleagues in the House on how to address the situation on a country-by-country level.
Thank you. And I also would add to that, we are calling this meeting Signs of Hope since in the collaboration with the universities, we were also pointed out there are some encouraging developments as well. So that's why we mention them. And I think one of the most encouraging, I personally think one of the most encouraging developments is Jan Figel. He started in 2016. And we have now the special envoy from Denmark. We have a special envoy in the United Kingdom. And we also had already the United Nations and the United States. But I see the importance of more FoRB on the agenda, to look for cooperation, to look for interreligious dialogue, because we have so many tensions in this world that are connected with religion, which means we should cooperate, try to find out what are the intentions of others in order to promote collaboration. I think that's far more cheaper than buying weapons and making war. Having said that, Mr. Gatti, maybe you can go into the detailed question on Liechtenstein and Norway and the report.
Sure. We analyzed 122 countries. This means all countries except some micro-states and territories, which we excluded because of geographical or demographic considerations, and 48 countries that are not EU members, but that score low on the indexes of the Pew Research Centers, on both indexes created by these research centers, so we kind of outsourced this pre-selection of countries. The reason why Norway and Liechtenstein are included is precisely because they do not score low on both indexes. So it is a purely mathematical consideration. You find further information at page 5 of the annex to the report.
Thank you very much. The lady at the side, yes, of the corridor.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I am normal citizen. I have studied physics and informatics. I'm very interested in the freedom of religion. I have two questions, very important. How we could to improve the respect of freedom of religion, the Minister from the European External Services. I give a very practical idea. You have a representative, for example, for freedom of religion in every European mission in the countries where the respect from freedom of religion are not existent. And you have all the accords, financially and economically, with this country. You stop it or you go to do this accord in function of this report of violation of freedom of religion, not freedom of, not human rights, freedom of religion. Second question that nobody speaking here is a propaganda from some dictatorial religious governments against another religion. And I take as country Iran, Saudi Arabia. They have a very opaque religious institution, government institution. Nobody knows who gives the orders to teach Islam, a very radical one. So what I like to have to ask, if it's possible, to have a transparency concerning these institutions in these countries, because they say, no, it's our problem, internal problem. It's not their problem if they are teaching all their children to fight against all the other world because we have another religion. So that's that I think that we can help our problem here in Europe doing a very a better teaching of religion in these countries.
Thank you very much. You really did not indicate for whom the question, but I think Mr. Giacomini. And maybe the second question, Jan, could you something? So Mr. Giacomini first, and then Jan Fieke.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, what can I say? First, thank you very much for your question. We do not have we do not have, and we will not able to have someone dedicated only to the freedom of religion in each country of concern. I mean, we have someone in charge of human rights in the political sections, among other things, but we would have to have, I don't know, 10 times the staff we have if we have to have such a specific mission for one person. So, and plus, I would say, as I said, we consider human rights as indivisible. A human right cannot be separated from the others because then you run the risk that it is considered sometimes in ways that could be detrimental to the other human rights. So that's a very important notion that they go together. Second, suspending agreements if freedom of religion is not respected. I would say we have essential element clauses in many agreements, but they are dealing with human rights as a whole, not specifically one human rights. And it's, I think, once again, my remark about the indivisibility of human rights is valid. So we have the possibility, respecting certain conditions, to suspend agreements if there are massive violation of human rights, and I would say freedom of religion is one of them. As regards the propaganda of some governments against other religion, of course, in the absolute, it must be condemned, and if we have opportunities to do so, we certainly do it. But the idea that we could, let's say, teach religions, I mean, in the appropriate way, instead of the governments of the countries concerned, for me goes a bit far. I mean, it would be presented as a case of blatant interference. So we have to be firm on our principles and convey the right messages, but we can only, I think, implement that kind of approach with the cooperation of the authorities concerned, or at least with an NGO involvement, a grassroots involvement, let's say, with local NGOs. But in this case, of course, it implies that the NGOs are free to operate in the country concerned. So that's what I can answer, I think, to that very tricky question. Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to add a few words as former Commissioner of Education that this is the answer, and we need to learn how we all, not only kids, how to live together in diversity, not only to exist in the world for some time, 50, 60 years or more or less, but to live in a responsible manner. And I see a lot of smartphones around. Some people have even more than one. We communicate a lot. We become digitally literate. Digital literacy is part of education in our schools. But we get into more and more divided society and mentality. And the problem is that we are not interculturally educated, that we don't know the others, we don't understand the others, and basically we don't understand even our own roots and traditions and cultures. So this is the problem, because with digital literacy you can find many criminals, very skilled digitally. So we need religious literacy to know, to understand, and to avoid the clash which is potential, clash of ignorances, clash of the people who don't know, who are simply very easy targets or victims of propaganda or lies or fake news or whatever news. And truth liberates, so we need to know the truth. This is our responsibility. This is one of the main signs of human person, quest for truth and liberty. And that's the best antidote against any propaganda. So I advise more religious education about religions. What is the difference? Why it's so important that last June the top authorities of the major religions, Sunni Islam and Catholic Christianity, met in Cairo, Pope Francis and Grand Mufti of Al-Azhar. Because when they meet, they signal the dialogue, cooperation, not clash, not division, is the answer. And we need this sort of communication and cooperation dialogue for more humane world where we live in more and more diverse communities locally, not only globally. So that's my answer as former commissioner, but also father of kids and man who is moving around, that religious dimension of identity is there, so religious competence is also very important to give proper answers to what you say on propaganda. Thank you.
Just one reply actually to what Mr. Giacomini said, and I'm looking forward very much to the discussion in COHOM tomorrow, the Council Working Group on Human Rights, because the EAS is not alone on this. There are also member states, and I understand from Denmark that you're playing with the idea maybe we can have a group of friends at the level of individual countries or states who are interested. If I take the example of Iran with Saudi Arabia, how can you even manage external policies if you have not the religious literacy that Jan Fiegel was talking about? So if EAS has limited resources, if you join up with interested member states and their embassies and staff, I'm pretty sure that you can have very good discussions on how to approach these countries and the role of religion in the countries concerned.
Thank you very much. I will take two more questions from that side, and then we go to the center and to the other side. First of all, the gentleman at the back side.
Thank you. Just really, I want to speak freely on the important point in the situation in Egypt.
I want to tell you, I want to hear questions.
Yes, a question, but it's a short time. When you ask the Egyptian government about human rights,
for who is your question?
Yes, I will clarify everything, please, if you please. They will say that human rights is applied in Egypt and also in the constitution, because there is a lot of statement in the constitution keeps the human rights. But really, the statement number 2 in the constitution says that the constitution is based on the Islamic Sharia. And when you say that cancel all other statements which protect the human rights. Because if the constitution is based on the Islamic Sharia that classifies the Christian and the other believer as kafir, and they are 10th classification and 10th grade, that means they have no rights in Egypt. Here I wear this cross. I am a Christian, but I can't wear this cross in Egypt because I will be killed there. There is no protection of human rights. There is no protection of freedom. There is no integration in Egypt. They prevent us from praying, from building our churches. They closed our churches. They prevent us from praying. They kidnapped our girls and forced them to be Muslim. This is the Islamic Sharia which the constitution in Egypt is based on also. So you have to go direct to the problem and discuss it clear. Why this statement is put in the constitution and that cancel all the human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. I didn't hear a question. Is there someone on this side of the table who wants to reflect? I see no one. Then the lady here in the middle.
I'm Lena Larsen, Director of the Oslo Coalition on Freedom of Religion or Belief, University of Oslo. Firstly, I want to thank for the work that has resulted in the report. It is improving, it is becoming deeper every year, and that is much appreciated. Then 2 points that I am missing. I am missing the digging into the diversity within religion or beliefs, because there are minorities within majority traditions, and the right to freedom of religion or belief is not to protect the religion, is to protect the believer. The third point that I'm missing is gender mainstreaming. It is pointed out in the beginning of the report that the intersection on freedom of religion or belief and gender issues, among others, is an important focus, but I can see nowhere that in the recommendations. Then, fourthly, I would call for an academic or including an academic cross-disciplinary approach in addition to the current approach in order to go deeper, and it is obvious that we also need sociology of religion, gender studies, and so on and so on. And fifth, I am very much looking forward to looking into the situation of freedom of religion or belief in Europe, because the situation is also going backwards here, and to speak and deal with it honestly, I think it will improve and strengthen the inter-European relations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I also heard some encouraging points. Thank you. Maybe Dennis and Mr. Gatti could give a reflection.
Well, very briefly, because I very much agree with all the observations made. The first two, I think we can still pick up in the course of this mandate. I think to extend the remit of the intergroup to the member states themselves, what happens inside the EU, is a fundamental decision. We have had those discussions in this mandate. We didn't include it yet, but the more we are becoming operational as we are, the more we can take on board. So it's up to the new parliament to decide on that. But your point is made. It's also in the discussions of diplomats with third countries. Of course you get questions on what happens inside the EU. So I think it's a logical next step, but probably not for this mandate, but then for the next one.
Mr. Gatti, any additions?
Thanks for your points. The idea about right to protect, that freedom of religion or belief protects persons and not beliefs is fully taken into account because, well, for a simple reason that that's international law, as you correctly state. So we started from this assumption when we made our analysis. And as for the cross-disciplinary approach, our research group is already composed of lawyers, sociologists, and political scientists, so it has already interdisciplinary in its outlook. But on the other hand, we focus on the law because we assume that the law is relevant for the European Union. That's what the guidelines say, by the way. And also because we assume that referring to the law is one of the most effective means to prevent criticisms of, let's say, neo-imperialism or of that sort. So that's the reason why we are so focused on the law, but we are not legalistic in our approach. You will see if you look at the annex that we also take into consideration violations of freedom of religion that are not caused by laws, but are caused by mere practices and sometimes even by social actors.
Thank you very much. The gentleman over there in the green shirt.
I'm Guido Korman of the Baha'i community, and I have a question for Mr. Giacomini. In 2017, there was a dialogue with Iran on human rights. What are the results, and what specifically are the follow-up of the human rights dialogue with Iran?
I think it was the first dialogue. I'm not sure we have a new dialogue program at this stage, so I would have to look into it and give you a more detailed answer in order to. But of course, it was a first step, and we are not there yet in terms of dialogue with Iran. I mean, it's not a regular dialogue we have with this country. But I can try and answer you in a more detailed manner if you wish.
I propose that you both get in contact after the meeting. The gentleman over there.
My name is Christoph Sauer, Professor for Religious Freedom. Congratulations for taking the report to a new level, engaging scholarship. My question to you, the chairpersons, would you also consider either the intergroup or any other entity of European nature to give an award, a prize or something for outstanding research, master's thesis, doctorates on religious freedom? That's my question. And a point of information, I'm glad Jan Fiegel also mentioned Germany. Germany has a special commissioner on religious freedom since the month of April, and he will start giving a report to German Parliament, so this source in future can also be used. Thank you very much.
Well, Dennis, maybe I'll try to answer this first question. I think it's a very good idea, but mind you, the intergroup itself is already struggling with limited men and women power. We do our best with a good team. They are there in the second row, and I want to thank them again. And of course, we have the collaboration with the European institutions, Commission and Jan Fiegel, etc. But I think for us at the moment, you are asking too much. But I think I like the idea, so maybe for next year within a new Commission, we will keep it in mind. Thank you very much. And well, your second question was, I think, more or less a remark. So then we go on in front here, the gentleman, the red tie.
Thank you. I have a question. The Copts in Egypt now in a very bad situation. What is your mechanism to stop this persecution against Christians?
How can you stop the development?
Yeah, maybe I will combine the two on Egypt. Yeah, situation there is dramatic, even bloody, and I think it's duly reflected in the report with high concerns, and not only in this report, but many international reflections on the situation there. There is influx of ISIS militants from Syria, Iraq, to the territory of Sinai Peninsula, and Sinai. You know much more than I don't need to repeat these facts. I was to go there last year, but it was then refused by the authorities for security reasons. Okay, but now we are preparing with the Egyptian government for full-fledged mission later this year. So I can tell you more when I am back, but Egypt is important. It's a strategic country, not only in the Middle East, but in broader European neighborhood. And we want to help not only human rights, but also justice to prevail. Many problems of not only Egypt, but also Pakistan and other countries is impunity. Myanmar, for example, that those who perpetrate crimes are not indicted, convinced, sentenced. And it's a signal or kind of recipe for others or for continuity. And justice is important for all, for victims, for survivors, for the country, for population. So we will work on not only human rights dialogue, but concrete projects with Egyptian partners. And I can tell you more when I'm back, or simply if you have special information, whatever you need to say, let's say privately or after the meeting, please let me or my colleagues know. Thank you. And also the gentleman behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We continue. The gentleman here in front.
I speak Arab.
We would like to say that in the essence of Islam, there is a duty to respect all religions, and provided there is this respect to all the religion. I mean, religious people have to be the cornerstone of propagating and disseminating the idea of tolerance and coexistence with all religions. What you have said, indeed, that in Iraq and in Iran, also Islam is also calling for tolerance and respect of other religions, and therefore in Iran, for example, the Sunnis are a minority, and their situation is not respected. However, this has nothing to do with the holy book that calls for respect for all religions, and therefore I think extremism and excessive religious discourse is counterproductive, whether it is Islam or other religions, and therefore the European Union, the European Parliament is aware that excessive discourse, radical discourse of any religion is at the end of the day bad and counterproductive. And it is very important for all of us here to work hand in hand to uphold human rights. My question: what serious steps are taken in order to protect religious minorities in any of the countries? And why didn't we ask Muslim scholars to be part of a think tank, to be part of a global endeavor to uphold tolerance? Thank you very much.
Well, I think that on your appeal to include also Muslim scholars into our work, we're very open to that. We have considered and also taken, I think, the first steps towards having more close contacts with the OAC on their work in this field. We have with the Bosnian community, who's also present here, had intensive contacts. So we try to be even-handed, and we appreciate very much the input that you mentioned on tolerance. So I can only say that all of these suggestions will be, for us, highlights that we take out of this meeting and will discuss for, hopefully, the next report.
I like a remark. because you also made a remark in the context of combating extremism. And I think that's a key element. We see extremism, we see hatred all around this planet. It is maybe one of the core issues in our report. There is too much hatred, there's too much extremism on various sides. On various sides. And therefore, we pick up your suggestion, because what we in the end want to do is indeed have tolerance and freedom of religion for all. Having said that, the gentleman here in front.
Hello, my name is Ivan Arjona from the Church of Scientology Europe. It's a remark and a question. The question would be to you and Mr. Figel, to any of you. First, the point on education. Of course, this is needed, and what is needed is to practice what we preach, right? So I know your mandate is not within Europe, it's out of your mandate, but I'm sure you are the two strongest men in this Parliament to ask for the Parliament to do something for inside. Denmark is teaching on new religions, so religious freedom for all, not only for the main and majority religions. They're having high schools going into other churches, also to teach religions at large, to create tolerance. They are practicing what they preach. They have a new envoy. So the question is, I still cannot figure out how a country like Russia, which has European citizens in jail because of their religions, which have people in jail because of their religion, like people from the Church of Scientology, for over 1 year now, with no trial, really, and the data has been provided to the group, to the intergroup for the report, and still there is no real response, and it's like outrageously missing in the report. Russia, I cannot understand it. I don't know what would you have to say about this. Thank you.
Well, I'm looking at Mr. Gatti, because he makes a specific remark on Russia. Maybe you can answer that question. And your first intervention, I think, was more a general remark. But Mr. Gatti.
Sure. Coming to the situation in Russia, it's not exactly missing in a sense that, as was already mentioned by Dennis, we tend to cover the whole world with those exceptions of microstates and non-problematic countries. If you look at in the annex, you will find in the Annex 1 quantitative data that we scored Russia, and the score of Russia, well, takes into account all the problematic issues there in terms of freedom of expression, in terms of discrimination, and so on and so forth. You will not find any detailed explanation of the scores on Russia for the simple reason that we did not consider Russia as a focal country, because in the application of our criteria, Russia was not, let's say, did not score high in terms of focalness. There are very specific explanations for that. You can find a table in Annex 2, the focalness methodology, and you will find out why Russia was not scored high in these terms. For instance, because it is not one of the candidate countries for accession to the European Union. That's one of the explanations. But of course, methodology, as was already mentioned by Jan Fiegel, are intrinsically prone to be contestable. So if you have any advice on that, on any idea why Russia should actually be included, which indicators we should take into account, I would be very happy to discuss that later.
You've made your point. The gentleman at the back.
Can I say?
Sorry.
Yeah, just in addition, because I welcome this point actually, and this is a vital point. That there should be no misunderstanding how we rate countries when it comes to their human rights situation. Then you have to look at the table, and you see for Russia it's a 7, which means out of 10. 10 is the worst. It ranks very highly, and we have certainly no sympathy for any of the human rights violations in that country, including for religious minorities. And this is one of the issues we shall discuss also with the researchers, how we can bring that out better in the next report.
Very well said. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Vincent Metten. I work for the International Campaign for Tibet in Brussels. I would like to welcome and congratulate the report of the Intergroup, which is an important piece for this discussion on freedom of religion. I've been through the report, and I've seen that Tibet and Buddhism has been mentioned in the annex, but not as such in the report, in the core report itself, under the China section, where you mentioned Uyghur, which is very important. I would like to know if in the next report or in the future you would give perhaps more prominent space to Tibetan Buddhism, which I think is a very important piece of the puzzle here, as a religion, belief, or philosophy. And I would like also to know if the intergroup as such would be interested in inviting the U.S. Commissioner on International Freedom of Religion, Mr. Tenzin Dorje. It's a Tibetan who is posted there, and I think he has a mandate for a certain time, not very long, and I think that would be an excellent transatlantic cooperation and message also. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, before I hand over your question to Mr. Gatti, as far as the United States are concerned, we have good contacts with all the religious freedom envoys, also Mr. Brownback and his staff, and we want to intensify that. So you made your point, and we are working on that already. We have a long, good contacts with the United States. As a matter of fact, one of them was here at the first presentation of our first report. Having said that, Mr. Gatti, could you comment on his first question?
If I understand correctly, you were asking about the report, not the annex. So it is about this, not the annex, because in the annex we do talk about the issues with Tibet. And as we were not involved in the report proper, and it's more a political issue, I think that probably Dennis is more qualified, or you yourself.
Oh, very briefly, we have not tried to repeat in the report the factual situation on the ground. We've taken that for granted with the Annex 1, done by the researchers, and we've tried to transfer that knowledge from the Annex into policy recommendations. So the policy recommendations you mentioned now are specific recommendations for China, and that's exactly the type of follow-up discussion we want to have with also the NGOs and representatives present here. If we can find new ideas, we shall have, as promised also Mr. Giacomini, a follow-up discussion with desk officers so we can easily take any suggestions on board that are realistic.
Thank you. In this plenary, I will take just maybe 2 or 3 other questions, because my experience is that it's also very important that we have some bilateral talks after the meeting, and we need some time for that too. So I will go to the gentleman there at the back, then the lady in the center, and you are the last one. The gentleman at the back.
You mean me? Thank you that you call me gentleman. So good morning. My name is Father Alexei Shihadi. I am the Director General of the Greek Orthodox Patriarchate of Antioch and all the East Department of Ecumenical Relations and Development. I just arrived from Syria via Lebanon to Brussels. We are the largest NGO in Syria, faith-based one. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you for Elizabeth for the invitation. I'm very glad to see that Syria is mentioned in your report, and very glad that you are considering the rebuilding of the religious and cultural sites of Syria after ISIS and Nusra Front and its sisters and brothers are defeated now from Syria. So we are ready to really help in this matter as much as we can. And we have a lot of churches, monasteries, mosques. They are destroyed in Syria because of the terrorist actions of ISIS, Daesh, and Nusra and others. So please, I'm emphasis on this now. I'm saying please let us do it, because it's very important for the Syrians to have their churches, monasteries, mosques rebuilt. They go back to the 4th, 5th, and whatever of centuries. And most of you have visited Syria in the past, and you know Syria from its good side. Let us work together to regain this nice side of Syria. Thank you.
Thank you for your statement and your announcement. and I think we are all aware about the grave situation in your country. I didn't hear a question, so I now go to the lady here in the centre.
Thank you. My name is Amy Shepherd. I represent CSW, that works specifically on freedom of religion or belief, also a member of the European Platform Against Religious Intolerance and Discrimination that works collaboratively on these issues. My question is to the co-chairs and also to a lesser extent to Mr. Giacomini. I welcome the depth of analysis in the report, and I'll certainly go away and read it in more detail. It's very clear that the recommendations have been developed in collaboration with the External Action Service. And there are some very specific references to EU mechanisms and EU processes, funding and training, and all sorts of concrete deliverables that are set out. And so my question is, to what extent during the preparation, during the development of this report and during the discussions with the EAS have concrete commitments been made to following these up? I mean, for example, if I look at, I just take one example, again, I've read it very briefly. On page 33 on Saudi Arabia, the recommendation is to launch an interreligious dialogue and FoRB tolerance programme via the Gulf Research Centre project on public diplomacy and outreach devoted to the European Union and EU-GCC relations. I mean, this is a very, very specific, concrete deliverable. Is there a commitment to this happening and to the other similarly specific recommendations made? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe Danis and Mr. Giacomini?
Thank you. To my knowledge, there were discussions between you and our colleagues in the ES, especially the GEO colleagues, but there is no commitment from our part. These are suggestions from the European Parliament and your delegation. So we will consider, of course, them with great attention, and we will discuss, I suppose, later on about the follow-up. But we of course have not taken a position as regards this paper. Because, of course, there is a separation of powers, if you can say so. The Parliament proposes, and we are in charge of the, let's say, the execution of the foreign policy of the EU. Thank you.
There is a separation of powers, and we try to blur that distinction as much as possible in practice for the effectiveness of it all. But that's why I said we're very much looking forward. It was over summer that we produced the report. Happily, Rafael took the time and effort to look at the general part. I think the individual part, it was very difficult for desk officers to, in the middle of summer, to look at each recommendation. So that's still something that has to be done. And but we shall have, as I said before, in the next report, of course, we look back at the implementation, and there should be at some point also some commitment made. But the other tool that we haven't used, but Merit McGuinness referred to that, is that also the Parliament has delegations with third countries, and we should also try to see what we can feed into those channels. Difficult, but with the help of the Vice President, it should be possible to make progress there.
And they are, as was stated in the report, recommendations. So also for you, every time you meet the Commission and the External Action Service, remind them of those recommendations. The lady over there, you have the final word.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. My name is Javada Shushko, Islamic Community in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I would like to thank the Parliamentary Intergroup for your commitment. Thanks to Mr. Dennis de Jong, to you, Peter van Dalen. But my special thanks goes to Mr. Jan Figel, whom I had the honor to welcome in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Sarajevo, and still your sentence that religion is not a problem but a part of a solution is still ringing in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I would like as well to express my sincere empathy with you, Father Paulus, for your experiences you had in Egypt. And I would like to use this opportunity, just one sentence, that it's not Sharia that you're mentioning or Islam. The problem is the Egyptian dictatorship that is currently oppressing not only Coptic Christians but as well many Muslims who are in the prisons. But what I would like to, before proceeding with my question, to stress that the Islamic community in Bosnia and Herzegovina has a very positive and intense cooperation with the EU. We're not only assessing and reporting violations of freedom of faith, but we are as well preventing. We're very much involved. We have concluded a project with the EU about prevention of radicalization. We're continuing this project with the support of the Ambassador Vigemark in Sarajevo. We are directly involved in the Interreligious Council in dialogue, interfaith dialogue, for the sake of stability and security in Bosnia and Herzegovina. My question is, and I think this is a great question for the end of this session, is what are your precise future plans? So what can we expect next year when we're sitting here and listening to your, hopefully, your next annual report launch? Thank you very much.
Well, this may be one of the most interesting questions. When will be the next report? As you know, there will be a European election, so a lot of colleagues will be, I think, active in the pre-election campaign, starting somewhere maybe in March. So I cannot tell you at the moment whether we will make a report. But what we will do when we make a new report, I cannot mention the date, but when we make a new report, first of all, we take up the comments made here in this room. We have had several comments about the quality and the status of our report. That's one. Two, there will be a new European Commission also in 2019, and we want to be sure that the position of the Special Envoy, which we have now, and pointed out in our report, is better than now, because we think that the Special Envoy and the work for religious freedom is really one of the key elements to combat extremism and to promote dialogue and mutual understanding. And I think those are key words in our work to come to a better world even. So let me promise to you that those will be the key elements for us in the next year. And I don't know, Jan, whether you would like to add something too.
Yeah, I mean, this would be the best kind of political legacy for the next. And next means those who get trust of people to represent Europe, European institutions, ad intra and ad extra. We need one face which is credible inside and outside. We cannot have, dichotomy. Teaching, preaching outside and molesting, embarrassing inside. So freedom of conscience is human dignity for everyone, everywhere, inside, outside. Second message, in 2 days I am invited to discuss special envoy mandate and guidelines in the Human Rights Committee of this Parliament, which belongs to the Foreign Policy, AFET Committee, with intention to have a plenary debate in November and plenary vote of the European Parliament on special envoy for freedom of religion and guidelines. So the whole Parliament will deal with this question about future. And my wish, and I think our wish, is that this is positive, constructive debate and commitment for the future which is coming today. And the wise people know that future started yesterday, because there are seeds. There are, issues which we already started to develop, and fruits will come later. Sometimes needs 18 years when some persons mature. But in this case, I think political legacy of these reports and the intergroup and my work and EAS can materialize in the institutionalization of foreign policy within the European Union, in the Parliament, in the Commission, in the External Action Service, for the sake of those who suffer outside or even inside. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. It's almost 1 o'clock, so I have to close the session. I don't know, Dennis, if you would like to say a few words before I finalize it.
You take the final conclusion, but I'm going to be a bit provocative. If you don't stand for re-election again, you have more time than when you are engaged in the election campaign. And that's why I was a bit more positive on having another report. But I also think it's important to have one after the elections, so that's not before the election, because then it becomes part of the election campaign. That's, I think, not very useful. We have always tried to be including all political groups or main political groups in the Parliament. But I do think that there could be quite a fight after the new Parliament takes on, as we had in the beginning as well, to get an intergroup established again in the Parliament. It's not self-evident. You only have 28, I think, in total, and there have to be sufficient groups supporting that. And for that reason alone, I think it's vital that our work continues. I would say at this moment the best way to guarantee that is to have a report again that's even better than this report, presented in June with the old and new MEPs there, and then we can leave it to the new Parliament to take it forward afterwards. But I commit myself at least to devote the increasing amount of time I have to this exercise.
Duly noted. I want to thank, first of all, the panel attendees here. Thank you very much for coming to us, and maybe especially also to you, Father, because you came from Italy and you are in a difficult position in Italy due to what you have encountered in your home country, Egypt. So I really appreciate it that you came over and to share your message with us. Then I want to thank you. Maybe some are disappointed that I could not give you the question, but there are some possibilities maybe afterwards to have some bilateral talks. And as I said, we duly noted your remarks on the report that were brought in today. And last but not least, before I say also thank you to the Arabic interpreter, and thank you very much for being with us and helping us. Well done. I want to see 3 ladies stand up, Ellen and Claire and Danielle, because the biggest work was done by the 3 ladies over there. A big applause. Thank you all. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.